Okay, while we're getting set up, I will introduce the moderator of our panel discussion. I would like to introduce Dr. Diane Hayes. She is co-founder and president of InCrowd. Yay. She started her career as an academic in the field of epidemiology, working on NIH-sponsored clinical trials, and then moved to the business of healthcare. After several stints at various healthcare research-related startups, Diane jumped off the cliff and joined me in starting InCrowd, where she manages the client services team and the crowd operations team, and frankly is the best co-founder ever. A fun fact about Diane, kind of scary, but it's true. She likes to kayak with alligators in Florida. They're there, she's there, they coexist. Diane will lead the panel on delivering on the unmet needs of client insights organizations. Please welcome Diane and the panel.
Great, thanks everyone. Well, thanks to everyone for being here today. It's really great to see such an awesome turnout. I'd like to thank our panelists as well and introduce them. Let's start down at the other end with Scott. Scott Van Luchten is Director of Market Research Excellence at Merck. He leads the customer strategy team for Merck's Global Customer and Brand Insights Group. It's a mouthful, but I think I got it right. Scott joined Merck in 2006 and has worked across several therapeutic areas supporting sales, the CMO, with their market research needs. In his current role, he's leveraging health literacy and numeracy to create patient-centric materials, a bit of the theme of the day, so nice to have you, Scott, for both healthcare providers and patients. Scott's a strategic leader who builds and sustains trusting, credible partnerships and has a proven track record developing innovative solutions, driving strategies in support of business, and creating value by creating capabilities, programs, and processes that advance the organization. Scott likes to say, be the change you want to see. So welcome to the panel, Scott. Next, we have Jim Bradley. Great. Jim is the Senior Insights Manager of Respiratory at AstraZeneca. Jim's focus is on strategic forecasting, commercial analytics, and research, specializing in business development assessment and inline commercial management. His combination of forecasting, commercial analytics, and market research skills provide that critical voice of the customer insights, anchored in a transparent, quantifiable metrics. Jim's created and led a highly successful market research innovations team and has done so by understanding customer needs, commercial value, positioning, and that differentiates healthcare products in increasingly crowded markets. And Jim's mantra here is lead with customer need, evaluate with solid analytics. So welcome to the panel, Jim. Our third panelist is Michael Miller. Mike is the chairman of Sound Health, a startup in Boca Raton, Florida. Mike's an accomplished and passionate businessman, an inventor, and creative guru. His logo is, I'm very passionate about making the world a better place. The title on my business card says, Solutionists. Words I live by. Michael's been immersed in marketing, advertising, and technology since the beginning of his career. He's the inventor of dozens of intellectual properties with patents pending and awards spanning the pet industry, the technology industry, and most recently, the medical industry. Michael's developed a process for connecting innovations with grant support from various agencies, sometimes including patient advocacy groups or universities, and then finding a resource for commercialization. So some of you folks here in the audience. So be sure to ask Michael about his innovations to use sound technologies for health applications. It's a very interesting startup he has going. And the innovations that have helped birth this new path for product commercialization. So this is our panel. We've heard some very interesting talks so far this morning. And I think what we'd like to hear from them is their insights on innovation, the different technologies, perhaps it's a test or a treatment, a new product that are coming to market, but it might also be an innovation in process that affects their day-to-day life. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions. I'd encourage the audience to get involved and also ask questions as we move along. And I would like everyone to have an opportunity to sort of comment on each of these, so it will help steer the conversation along that way so that you're all involved. The first thing that I'm very interested in is understanding how you manage this flood of new technologies. What rises to the surface? What captures your attention? Why? What are some of the challenges and hurdles that you face in trying to figure out how to integrate that into your day-to-day life? And you know, I know at least two of you work in fairly large organizations, and there are a lot of layers in those larger organizations. How do you navigate that? How do you become nimble, as we've heard we all need to be, and be able to adapt some of these new technologies that really can truly help you get to your end goal? Why don't we start at the end with Scott and work our way down?
Well, there's a couple questions there you asked. The navigating the environment, I think, is a critical one. We're very fortunate at Merck for two reasons. One is we have a compliance team within our market research team. And so they are the key people we can partner with to figure out ways to get these things through. The bigger challenging part, I think, your reference is the new technologies and how to use them and when to use them. And I was a little surprised sitting here this morning and realized what a technology geek I still am and how aware I was of a lot of the things that they were talking about today. What I think is really interesting is it's important to not only know how to use the technology, but to show the business case for why it's relevant to us, and in some cases even sharing costs. If it's something you've never done before, how can we pilot this together to show value and bring it to the business? And if we can find those three things, you know, we'll find solutions to make them happen. Now, the one caveat to that, and I think Lisa alluded to this earlier, is it's also finding the right partners. Not everyone that I work with is a technology geek that's going to be right at the front of the innovation curve and want to adopt this stuff. So finding the people that are really interested in using this stuff and figuring out how to leverage it is also critical. And that's another place I think that we're very fortunate at Merck, because we have a group that's really focused on finding the new technologies and bringing them in. This is their full-time job. And so we then partner with the rest of our company to trial them and bring our knowledge to them so that they get comfortable using them. Great.
Jim, what about your
I really agree, especially with the component on knowing what the technology is and knowing when it's appropriate to use it. We had what might be viewed, I think, as two kind of disparate views of insights this morning. One is that we really need to get more empathic, more empathy in what we do, and that's true. We also saw that we need to be able to get information very quickly. So you have two ends of the spectrum. You have Caleb with 5-minute surveys, and you have Corey Schwartz with much deeper insights. And I think they actually go together really well in an innovative process. One component of innovation of any kind is the concept of rapid prototyping or fast failure. Mm-hmm. So the way we like to do it is use that kind of quick read to narrow down the things that we want to dive deeper into. And then we're still working on it, but get that more deeper emotional empathic connection and that voice of the customer that is, I think, missing in some of the pharma sort of sea of sameness that we see out there sometimes.
Do you think wearables will have an influence in that space?
The trick for me on all of that is what are the things that are going to actually motivate patients to do the right thing? And you know, wearables are great, but how much are they going to cause someone to engage? It frustrates me every year when near the holiday season I read the newspaper article about, you know, here's how to avoid weight gain during the holidays. You know, substitute a carrot stick for a chicken wing. It's like, well, of course, I know that. It's not the information. It's how do we get it to where I'm motivated and moving along? And I think some of it was mentioned, the concept of community and inciting action through community and accountability. And so I don't know how wearables are gonna come into that. I'm more interested in kind of the gamification part that might follow, but I don't know.
Well, if I could add to that, I think that the experience has to be fun. So instead of trying to push things at people, you want them to want to pull them to themselves. And wearables are an incredible opportunity because it enables the person to actually get some immediate gratification. The object, though, has to be to make that obvious to them, and not trying to push it at them and saying you're doing something wrong, but engaging them to want to do something right. And oftentimes, we look at different technologies and situations from our side, and we're guilty of that. We have to look at the puzzle from everyone's side. And I think once you start to do that, the pieces start to fit in place. And I know just from where we sit in our organization, as we look at innovation, sometimes innovation is created because the opportunity to innovate was there. But we look at what is the problem that's actually solving, right? And then going to the people that will actually get a benefit from that. So I think we have to just change the way we look at things. Instead of pushing things, you want people to pull them to themselves.
Yeah, can I add to that? Because I really love the concept of wearables. I think it's really early in where they are. But I think you touched on the key point, which is what is in it for the patient? As market researchers, we all know here, we're going to ask a question, we get an answer. I love the concept of ethnography and observance, where we can start to learn what people do from wearables and from the techniques we have out there that just observe and check in with their daily routine. And I think those insights, when we get to that point, will be huge and really help drive our business and better decision making.
You know, there's a business aspect of the wearable, though. So the interesting thing in the technology side of the wearable is the data that's being extracted. And I can see a point down the road where you're going to almost be required initially in certain circumstances to have a wearable. Perhaps the first marketplace might be in the rehab place, where instead of collecting a urine specimen and getting that analyzed, that wearable will give you, continuous monitoring. So we're going to see different compliance components drive that as a business factor as well. So if I'm the consumer, what do I get from a wearable? Well, I may be able to get lower cost healthcare. I may be able to see other kind of advantages that affect my life. So I think once again, once we start looking at what the consumer gains from the technology, the path to getting that in place becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think we hear a lot that we don't want to be watched and we don't want to be monitored. But I also think that there are going to be different incentives in the very near future. Like you mentioned, we don't want to be monitored for, say, smoking or drug use. Yet, if we're offered lower insurance rates, that's a whole different ballgame. You know, and that will change shortly.
And do you think that's a generational issue? I see my kids and my kids' kids who are less concerned about being monitored, who are way freer on Facebook with thoughts and actions and behaviors. That makes me incredibly uncomfortable. But it feels very generational, and perhaps, as that changes, so changes the industry.
Yeah, Diane, I think we can't look at the world and assume everyone's looking at it through our eyes.
Right.
Because I don't see a generation gap. I see all different people adopting based on the values or the benefits they're getting from it. And it's not really an age thing, it's that whole perception thing. So I think we're all probably guilty of forecasting our personal views on why we wouldn't do something, but I am always surprised at the end of the day of how many people are doing things that I say I would never do that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So Mike, what innovations do you see sort of on your horizon that have the opportunity to kind of impact healthcare in a big way?
I think the most exciting thing, aside from our inventions, are the process that we've been able to clear. When I got involved in healthcare, I really didn't understand it, so therefore my naivety helped us out a lot. But I saw that it was a very inefficient model. What we've been able to do is create a very hyper-efficient model, which means taking innovation directly to the markets without having to burden the people with the innovation with venture capital and all those kinds of painful things, where we participate in a non-dilutive fashion to them to bring their products into the market in a very hyper-efficient method. Mm-hmm. So what I see in healthcare is models like mine really bringing solutions into the marketplace in a much faster method than have happened in the past. And that's what really excites me.
Mm-hmm. So you feel like the water's hot, it's boiling, we're really ready to make these changes? the three of you really feel like innovation is our friend, and we're ready to kind of jump into the boiling pot right now and move into the next brave new world?
Speaking for me,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I love innovation. The challenge I have with it is defining the right place to use it and bring it in and test it. And it's not so much the innovation that's the challenge, because I will find ways. I've found that when you go to your legal compliance regulatory partners and say, this is what we want to do, they're going to help you come up with solutions to make it work. So if you want to invest the time, I think you can definitely get huge payback. To me, the bigger challenge is the amount of data we have. And you know, I'm going to drop my big data word. I hate big data. That doesn't do me any good. I need smart data. I need relevant data. I need the data that is going to drive my decisions. And that, for me, is when people can start to hone in and shape the data so it's useful right out of the box. Here's what you need, you know, or I can set up a simple query to get at it. That is the piece that I'm really looking for, because right now, big data just slows you down. I had a perfect example 2 weeks ago. I needed to get statistics on adoption of computers and tablets and things around the world. I got sent 6 reports. Now I had to go through all 6 reports, pull out the relevant things, and do an exact sum. To me, that should have been, if I was asking for that, that should have come right to me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think the big data thing, you know, is undoubtedly coming, and it does need to be packaged. And my caution on big data is it like the micro survey, which is very, very useful. It will allow us to answer some questions more rapidly. I just want to make sure that, so what we do now is we have to go ask those questions of our customers more often. When big data is here and it's easy to use, when that happens, we'll have more opportunities to just get the data answer without engaging our patients or physicians. And I want to make sure while we have the big data view, we also really are still driving towards the voice of the customer.
So let's not get stuck in the term big data, though, because in big data are these needles in the haystack, right? And those needles happen to be the solutions. So we have to approach this whole big balloon of information by parsing out what the benefits are to the people. And what I really enjoy is this is an incredibly innovative time of our lives. I mean, we are seeing doctors coming into our office with solutions that work, and they just can't figure out how to get them into the market. And sure, they have data components to them, but when they go and try to pitch their idea to someone, it gets lost really very quickly. What we need to do is extract what the value is to see how it best solves that target audience, how it solves that patient, how it betters that person's life. And then go to the people that have the influence, like the political people, the foundations, the universities, and get them to want it. Once again, not pushing it, getting them to pull that they want to be part of the solution. You know, when I have conversations with the FDA, my conversation is not about I want to do something with you. I want to share something with you to give you an opportunity that may make sense. So once you give them the buy-in that it becomes their idea, I learned this being married for 26 years. When it's their idea, it just works. And so that happens, that's where we have to go with the data. It's not so much, let's analyze this. Let's make it yours so that you actually like it. And once that happens, I think you just get really far down the road a lot faster.
I think innovation-wise, in a different angle, you know, the evolution of how we pay for healthcare is going to be, I don't know if it falls under innovation, but one of the big things we'll be dealing with in the future. And you know, as accountable care organizations start to define what they are, for example, you know, then suddenly the metric for a payer might change from what's the cheapest pill I can get from you now to what's the whole package that I can get that will increase the health of my members and my overall cost over time. And I think where those move, and they're already moving, you know, we already have
disease management?
More of a disease management, a whole patient management, and we already have patient satisfaction as a component of some payers' formulas. So it is moving, but I think we're all still wondering what is it going to look like.
So if you look at the data, though, then you have to go back to how you're collecting it, and that goes back to wearables. So if one of the pieces of healthcare costs are exposure and compliance issues and problems with the patient, having them self-monitoring and providing us with that kind of accurate data, we'll be able to reduce those healthcare costs by being able to see where the inefficiencies are, and it oftentimes could be at the patient level. And if they're incented to be able to provide this data into the big data warehouse, if you will, to lower those costs, I think once again that's going to help us to bring those costs down, give us more data to analyze to see what works before we even try it, and just have a better outcome for everyone involved.
Yep, I agree. And it helps us also test what our assumptions are. So for example, why are these patients failing? You know, we think most of them quit smoking. Well, as it turns out, maybe they didn't, and a wearable has reported that to it. You know, I agree that kind of monitoring
But we have
needs
to make
be
it
done.
fun. Because if it's not fun for the people with the wearables, they're not going to wear it. They're going to put it on their dog or something. I just met with a doctor that was telling me he had some kind of a product that was able to keep people from putting these monitors on their pets. Because apparently people put these monitors on their pets, and it looks like they're active.
Go hit the tennis ball.
And meanwhile, they come back and their knees are a mess because they haven't been exercising. So it's got to be fun. So whatever we're trying to put together, everybody has to get some enjoyment out of it.
It's a good way to get 15,000 steps in 90 minutes. It really is.
Okay.
Going back to a point that was brought up around the changing marketplace, I think that's a real critical piece. You know, 5 years ago, most of us in the room had an HMO or a PPO, and you'd spend $5 or $20 to go to the doctor and didn't really think much of what you were doing. And you know, you'd take your pills as you could afford them, and that was that. Today, I can't speak for other companies, you know, we've got $250, $500 deductibles that we have to pay before anything kicks in. And to me, that puts a skin in the game for the patients. I all of a sudden have to make a choice on where I'm going to spend my money. And if I'm going to spend $100 on a prescription fill, I'm probably going to be more invested in taking it and the benefits of it. And I think that, you know, we're going to see consistent ownership change with patients taking a more active responsibility just because they're taking a more active responsibility in the financial of their health care. It's not just about a $5 pay here or $10 pay here.
Well, we do have quite a few vendors in the room as well, and I'm curious as to what is it that rises to your level of attention? What kind of can bubble up through all the noise as something that's sort of a really interesting innovation? What captures your attention and it makes you learn more about this thing that's come across your desk today? Is there anything that might be of interest to the crew that you could share with us?
For me, I hinted at earlier, I've always been about understanding the emotional component of patients. You know, one of my key responsibilities right now is adherence. And if adherence was as simple as telling people when to take their medicine, the problem would have been solved years ago. There's a huge emotional aspect of it. And that goes through everything that we do. There's a reason why people will spend $150 on a pair of jeans, but you know, they don't want to fill their prescription medicine. So anything we can do to understand the emotional component of patients, I think is huge. I recently worked with a vendor who was able to bring pictorials and visualizations into online research, which was really insightful in understanding why patients were doing what they were doing. I'm always looking for solutions where we can get at that piece to really understand the context behind why they're doing it and how they're feeling and what end benefit they're looking for.
That's really, I think, where I am too, is reaching whatever that emotion or empathic connection is that helps us figure out what causes the way they feel and what motivates them to do what they do. I would just add to it, we do talk about patients a lot, but I haven't given up on pulling emotional benefits out of physicians yet either. It's not as easy. Payers I gave up on a long time ago, but physicians and patients are, I think are both groups of humans, and we tend to think of the patients as more human than the physicians, but they need to be treated that way too, I think.
And it's fun when you can get them.
Yep.
My business focus is on working with the healthcare inventor. So this could be a doctor that has an invention. This could be an engineer that has a healthcare invention. And the rule that we apply is one that you don't see much. It's called common sense. Who the hell's going to use this thing? So we look at these innovations and we look at it from the back side. Instead of you invented it because you could, who is going to benefit by this? And if we can look at it with common sense and figure out where that fits in and who the market is, those are the ones that we chase. We see a lot of stuff that comes in that doesn't make sense, and if we can't figure it out common sense, we'll let that go stew for another 10 years. But the things that are really able to make an impact today immediately, common sense, they just need a little bit of traction, a little bit of innovation, a little bit of dollars, a little bit of science behind it. Those are the ones we run with, and the marketplaces are screaming for them. So if you ask me what we're looking for, the shiny objects are the ones that just make sense.
So even if there is a common sense approach, even if perhaps it's ahead of its time?
So ahead of its time, whose watch are we using? Right. So we look at, I have doctors that come into my office that say, I've been using this in my practice for 3 years and it treats this problem and I can't figure out how to get it into the market. That's not ahead of its time.
Nope, not at all.
That's our time. So those are the things that we're seeing.
Interesting.
I think we tend to get it switched very often in other industries too, but definitely in pharma, where it's what do we have and what story can we tell about why this is valuable, rather than what's the unmet need out there in the market and how can we fill that. I think time and time again we take what we have and we make it differentiating and valuable. And often it is, but it's not what the market asked for, it's what we have, and here we can help show you the value of it.
And I'm sitting right in the middle of the market.
And you're sitting right between.
That's the different vantage point that I have.
Interesting. So talk to us a little bit about unmet needs. What do you experience on a day-to-day basis where there's a gap? You just don't have the tool or technology or process that you need in order to really get to the end game?
There's a lot of them. The first one is the easy data synthesis. That's always something where we're looking for. One of the big things, two big things we're working on right now. One is around health literacy, which is in my world, but is really creating clear communications to patients and ultimately physicians as well, but we're focused on patients. And it's so challenging to find people that have even worked in this space, and it's challenging from understanding the patients and what we need to do to make techniques, research effective and clear with them, because these people aren't even in our research. Like we found out from trial and error that we're not even getting these people. So that's a huge one, or huge challenge for us. Then the other big thing that we're really looking at, and it goes back to customer centricity that we were talking about earlier, which is looking at our business, our products, our solutions from the customer's eyes. So many of us have done the monitor process or basic marketing where you build your products, you define your market landscape, your customers, what do they want, blah, blah, blah. Most of that does not stop and say, all right, let's turn around and put it from the customer perspective. And so we're looking at ways to build those processes, looking at our businesses from the other side into our tools, because we think we'll be able to drive better solutions and better communications looking at it from the other side. So those are the big topics we're facing right now. Yeah. And social media.
And whenever we talk about physicians and patients communicating, I think too often we will do kind of a patient study, a patient approach, and then a physician approach. And the real big issue is that they're speaking a much different language. And in the middle, you're having a patient that is a group of patients that's consistently saying the same thing that should be identified as a part of the diagnostic process, but the physician's not hearing A1C or whatever it is he or she needs to hear, so they're missing in the middle there. I think bridging that gap is a unmet need on the research side.
The gap that I see is working innovation that is ready, almost ready for the market, but can't figure out how to get to the market. They can't find the funding, they can't find the science, and they can't find the ability to get it into the market for compliance purposes. What I have found is that those other three people are screaming with the same problems. We've got universities that can't get funding because they don't have any projects, and the NIH isn't doling out money anymore. So we're solving that problem by bringing tangible research to the school. The second problem that I see is that the doctors don't know how to raise capital or put the product into the market, so we take care of that as well. And then the third problem is with all these layers of compliance in big companies, being a small, nimble company like us, we're able to get those products into the market, where then we're meeting with companies like these that say, oh my God, how did you put all this together? We need it to distribute into the market. So the gaps were there. I came into them with them, but looked at it from their sides of what they all needed, and just by filling them backwards seems to work. So I'm always looking at the solution from your side, not from my side.
Well, let's open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions in the audience for the panel? I think they're, yep, in the back.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions about wearables.
Wearables.
Yeah. So, Michael, you had talked about common sense ideas, and when I hear people talking about wearables and the potential and the opportunities associated with it, I think of folks who suffer from chronic conditions like hypertension, diabetes, who are old. They live in CD markets. They're not well educated. What is the likelihood that someone like that is going to have the ability to take advantage of innovation, be able to afford wearables, and take advantage of where I perceive the biggest opportunity to lower the cost of healthcare for all of us?
You see the sneakers they're wearing? If you go into those neighborhoods, and they have the watches, they have the phones, they have the sneakers, they have the equipment. I appreciate the fact that they might not qualify on an income bracket of wherever that is, but I think that those markets are ready for these things. They have the Fitbits. So I don't think we're going to have pushback from people using it. Once again, as long as they're seeing the benefit to do so. So it's got to be fun. It's got to be trendy. And things are trendy. Look at the Apple Watch, for instance. You can't even buy one. So they're trendy. Kids love them. I have a group of pediatricians that are requiring the kids to have Fitbits on them. Cool. And they are then reading the data. It's a concierge. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you meant here in the U.S. I see the one laptop people doing some exploration in that space, and that might be a good insertion point with their mesh network of how that's rolling out. We'll have to see that.
Any other thoughts?
I'm not the evolution of technology expert. I'm gonna pass.
I would just say, I think it goes back to common sense. It's, you've got to bring the right technologies to the right markets that will work. If you look outside of the US, the smartphones and things have greater penetration there than here. And so as time changes, obviously we just need to figure out what will work in these areas, what's relevant to their ecosystem, and how it can be most beneficial to them.
By the way, define wearable. We have a company in our portfolio that's making tiny little sensors that are wearables for, and they're less than fractions of pennies. So the cost will drive down as time goes on.
Yep.
I'd like to address the needs of the elderly, because whenever we've talked about elderly patients, and obviously they're the ones that are going to have a lot of these chronic diseases, I've been told, oh, but they don't have a computer, they don't have a smartphone. And it seems like a lot of these technological innovations are targeted more towards the younger populations. So what do we do with this current elderly population?
I don't know the numbers, but I've had, I think, that bias before too, and I think they do have computers. And then I think as the rest of technology gets cheaper, even if they're not computers, they will have some sort of hub within their home. The older physicians, I was worried that they're not tech savvy, but they're all getting most of their medical information from searches originated with Google. And even if it's an issue now, I think it won't be long before it's not. And again, just with as we go forward in time, like our 13-year-olds now will be 23, and I don't think that's going to be an issue.
Well, I think in the U.S. you see some of the even alarm companies starting to offer monitoring, personal monitoring services. So I can't imagine that that's not a huge marketplace. If you remember, I've fallen and can't get up.
Ancient.
Right, that's like, geez, 20, 30 years ago. So I do not think that that is a barrier. Once again, people find these things to be fun. They see the benefits to them. It's certainly better than trying to figure out how you're going to get up if it's automatically notifying. So they're not big bulky things anymore. I don't see that as a barrier here in the U.S. anyway.
And it goes to building them. You got to build them simple. I mean,
With big
I'm
print.
sure many of us have parents that are older that have gotten a smartphone and you get the call, I don't know how to do this, I screwed this up. Yeah, on the landline, and you walk them through fixing it. But the wearables and things, the simpler they are, if you can make it so you just put it on and charge it, you know, they'll be adopting it, they'll be using it. If you make it complicated, you'll probably have a different hurdle.
Just a quick comment is, I think as far as the question of penetration to underserved markets, I think part of that can be through the healthcare system prescribing, you know, the devices and prescribing these services, and then there's a third party who can pay for that device or the service or monitoring service.
Which goes back to
Just
your
a comment.
question as well, yes. Making it easy to use and accessible and affordable.
So just a
Question?
quick comment. I find it interesting that you said that you have a bunch of pediatricians who are requiring that these kids wear these Fitbits. Being on the vendor side, the RFP du jour, I get one about every week now, is, oh, we have, you know, this great new app or this new thing that can track all this data from this patient, and it can text a doctor. Do they want to text? Do they want it all like sent to them via email? You know, how do they want to get all this great information about their patients so that they can provide better care for them and so forth? And in the experience that we've seen over the past several months now, as these are becoming more and more frequent, these doctors are terrified of this information. You know, while it all sounds great in theory, as we think about barriers that we're facing, maybe it's not so much in getting the consumers to wear them, but in the reality of these doctors are terrified of their liability once they get all this data readily available to them, and what are they supposed to do about it? And they're busy all day long. They can barely, you know, get anything else in edgewise, and if they got a text in the middle of them doing something else that said that their patient was having a cardiac event and they didn't text them back, or whatever the case may be, you know, this whole issue of liability for the physician on understanding how to use this data is an issue. I'm just curious if as organizations, y'all are trying to figure out how to address this or putting some thought towards it, because I do think in my limited exposure, it's been a huge issue.
That's the big opportunity. Mining that data, parsing that data, and delivering that data so that the other side's not overwhelmed, which is the doctor, right? We want to make that data easier for him to understand and interpolate without having any kind of compliance issues or being accused of being guilty of not looking at that data. That's another whole huge opportunity. So that's a race. I wonder who will win that one.
Well, and I think we could put social in that bucket, you know, another challenge in this industry. How do we manage the whole social environment and concerns about liability? I'm sure you guys are grappling with that every day as well.
Well, social's really tough just because as pharma companies, we normally, there's a pretty big firewall between us and a patient with things being double-blinded and all that. And that we're working through a lot of those compliance issues, and it's easy to get data that's de-identified from that, and also patients are willingly providing data in an open forum. So there are all those issues that I think our legal teams are working on constantly. But then the big thing is what we have to learn what to do with it, because the only time I ever put anything on social is if I'm really happy or really mad, never anything in the middle. So how do we interpret what it is when we get a complaint? And then we have additional liability issues, any adverse event that we're looking at, things like that. You know, we have to go through that reporting process there.
That comes back to authenticity. So is the data even authentic? So there's two huge opportunities in just that data pool right there.
Right, true. Well, I think we're winding down on our time, and there's a break following this, so I'm sure everybody needs to get up and move around a little bit. So I'd like to thank our panelists.
Thank
it was
you.
really terrific having you today. And do you want to talk? So I believe we're off for a break now, so enjoy a little bit of coffee.
3 minutes, and then we split sessions.